Hello everyone. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes came out in June, adding 13 new support conversations for Edelgard to the 12 she already had in 3 houses, so I thought I'd rank and give my thoughts on the 25 support conversations she has across both games. I've also done support conversation rankings for Dimitri, Claude, and Dorothea, so if you want to watch those first, the links are in the description. I will rank these supports based on the character development the characters go throughout, the general story structure, and, if it applies, the paired ending that these two characters share. Just so you know, there are some supports that Edelgard has in 3 houses as well as 3 hopes, so I will clarify which one I'm talking about. If you enjoyed the video here today, like the video for more Fire Emblem content in the future, and subscribe. So without any further ado, let's get into the support conversation ranking of Edelgard. Usually I'd have more bad stuff to say about the last place on any one of my lists, but they literally just talk about cats. No joke, all Edelgard and Linhardt discuss in this support conversation is cats. And I'm not saying every support conversation has to be this grand tale with a tragic backstory reveal, but they could have at least brought up something about the main story, because at the end of the day, I really don't care how Edelgard feels about cats. This is probably one of the most annoying supports in both games. I cannot stand Monica. I saw her in the trailer for the game, and I was so excited that we'd finally be able to see what Monica's really like, and seeing she's essentially an Edelgard simp, for lack of a better term, kinda disappointed me. Yes, there are other characters like that, like Hubert, Catherine, and Cyril, but each one of them, with maybe the exception of Cyril, have their own personality. Like, Monica freaks out over everything that Edelgard says, and the minute she invites her to tea, she lists out every single time she's done that. And that's kinda creepy, and I didn't enjoy it at all. And sure, they do talk about the main story with Edelgard's thought process on rescuing Monica, but it just doesn't help with all the annoying stuff thrown in. It just takes away any enjoyment I would have had watching it. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this support conversation, but I think it suffers from it being too short. And this will become a common theme throughout, but this support is literally only one conversation. Sure, the stuff they talk about is actually not that bad. They talk about Edelgard's reasoning for wanting to be in the front lines and fight with everyone else, but since it's so short, it doesn't really get the chance to be memorable or leave an actual impact, which definitely makes for a support that is definitely not that interesting or entertaining. The support between Bernadetta and Edelgard is also a pretty boring one. Throughout this support, the main things they talk about is Bernadetta's parents and Edelgard's fears about the war. Part about Bernie's parents is kinda nice, because we kinda get more details on what Count Varley is doing at the monastery. And Edelgard discussing her fears with Bernadetta is pretty cool, because Bernadetta is a very fearful person, so it makes sense that Edelgard would want to talk to her. But these topics are better explored in other supports. For example, Bernie's parents is best explored in Bernadetta's support with Byleth, as it really helps us see why Bernie is the way she is. And there are several supports that Edelgard has that better explore her fears than this one. So that slides its support into being forgettable, although it's still not that bad, as it does a decent job of showing that Edelgard and Bernadetta are pretty similar. Again, Petra and Edelgard's major flaw with this support is the short length. It's just one conversation, so like the other ones, it doesn't really have the time to develop anything or have a very good plotline. Edelgard and Petra mostly talk about the differing cultures in Brigid and Fodlan, which is pretty interesting, and then they move into the I am determined to end the war, which is a pretty standard plotline, but it still works pretty well here. And overall, the support is pretty solid. Definitely wouldn't say it's one of the best, as it's pretty short, but all in all, as I like the dynamic between Petra and Edelgard, I think this is good nonetheless. Like the last support, this one also is one conversation, but I like this one a tad bit better than Petra and Edelgard's. Firstly, Edelgard tries to apologize to Dorothea for cutting the time at Garreg Monastery short to prepare for war against the Church of Saros, which is pretty unique for her supports in 3 Hopes, as there's not really anyone else that talks to her about that they were disappointed about Garreg Monastery getting shut down, which is something I thought more of the characters would be, but that's neither here or there. Then Dorothea pretty much tells Edelgard that it's okay that she shut down Garreg because she was doing it for the right reasons. And then they go on for a 1-minute rant on how they're best friends, which takes up way too much time on the support, because they literally come up with nicknames and saying, we're best friends. But unlike Edelgard's support with Monica, this did not damper my enjoyment of the support at all. Overall, I think it's a little more entertaining than some of the supports I've talked about earlier, and that makes it deserving of the number 20 spot on this list. Edelgard and Caspar's support is the first one to be from 3 houses on this list. The only reason I like this one better than the ones below it is because it is a full length and not just 1 or 2 conversations. Because to be honest, the support is boring to me. All it really does is let Edelgard feel like she's doing the right thing, which really isn't something Edelgard needs to feel because she already is very clear that she thinks she's doing the right thing. Neither Caspar or Edelgard go through any major character growth here, which, well, isn't the worst, but I would have preferred something since it was a full-length support. And it doesn't really explore any unique aspects of Caspar or Edelgard either, other than how Caspar deserves a future role of Minister of Military Affairs over his brother. I think there are ways to improve the support, like giving Caspar an idea to help Edelgard with her military training or something, but that would just make it feel more like Edelgard's support with Ferdinand. It's not like the support is bad, it's just not anything special. Again, this one's not all that interesting, but at least it does give an interesting job for Linhardt that's a perfect ending for him. Essentially, if Edelgard and Linhardt have a paired ending, Linhardt has the job to study Crest, but allowing all the time off that he needs, as well as rescinding his future title. I guess outside the ending, I do like the character development, as little as it was, for Edelgard, as she learns to loosen up on Linhardt because he works best when he's not being pressured. But again, it's pretty average, so I don't have a strong opinion either positively or negatively. You might have noticed around this part of the ranking that I've said a lot of these supports have not been interesting, and that also somewhat applies here. The actual support itself is fine. We get to learn some aspects of Manuela that we don't really get to learn much elsewhere. Other than that, though, I can think of literally nothing else to bring up here, at least nothing I can think of right now, so that's why it's toward the bottom of this list. For the most part, Edelgard's support with Bernadetta is largely her trying to get Bernadetta to talk, and Bernadetta running away screaming, which doesn't really sound entertaining, but since it involves Bernadetta, makes it so. My favorite part of this is in their B support when Edelgard is trying to help Bernadetta with her reclusiveness, and then Bernadetta just stands there and screams and doesn't run away. That was probably either a developer oversight or just trying to save time and money, but even still, it was funny because she screams like she's about to run away, as Bernadetta does, and then she just doesn't. I also think their paired ending is solid, as it really represents what was going on in their supports, whereas other supports, like Manuela and Edelgard's support, doesn't really. Basically, Edelgard and Bernie work together to govern Folan, which is nice character development for Bernie because before, Edelgard was definitely someone she'd never want to interact with because she's scared of her. I think if I had to say anything negative about it, is that it's not really interesting if Bernadetta wasn't in it, because the writing was kind of boring, but it's Bernadetta that makes it interesting. If you watch the support conversation ranking I had for Dorothea, you know I already talked about this support, so I'll briefly go over what I talked about in that video. Basically, the positives I had with it is that it featured two of my favorite characters, Edelgard and Dorothea, and the slightly altered dialogue in the B support was very nice, depending if you had Edelgard and Byleth up to an A support. However, it is kinda average and boring, but it's still a very good support. As I said when I talked about their other support, I really like the dynamic between Petra and Edelgard. Since Edelgard and Petra are both leaders of their respective regions, they have to work together to bring peace between Folan and Bridget. And the support is pretty good too, because as characters, Edelgard and Petra work well off of each other, as Edelgard is very serious and ambitious, and Petra is more laid back and ambitious. The main thing I don't like about the support, however, is that it's only up to B support, so it doesn't really allow the support to shine that much, or really explore any facets of the Petra and Edelgard dynamic with their characters. But at least it's not as short as their support in Three Hopes. The support between Edelgard and Balthus is, for the most part, a good support. My favorite part in this support is when Balthus impersonates Hubert, because it's kind of funny and it's really good. And the actual story of the support is pretty okay too. Balthus basically tries to get a job with Edelgard, but since Balthus is Balthus, Edelgard and Hubert don't really want to hire him. And then eventually, after the support is over, she does end up hiring him. And that's really all there was to it. But since the Balthus impression of Hubert was really close to how he actually talks, I had to bump it up a bit. Yes, in Three Hopes, if you recruit Byleth, you get a support conversation with Edelgard and Claude, Edelgard and Dimitri and Claude. They are all very strong, but in my opinion, this is probably the weakest out of the three. Sure, they do talk about the game's events, like the team up between Claude and Edelgard, but since Claude and Edelgard don't really have as much ties as, say, Edelgard and Dimitri, it's not really as strong. But this support does do a good job of showing the similarities and differences between Edelgard and Claude in their personalities. But as cool as it is to see supports between two of the game's main characters, I definitely wouldn't say it's stronger than any of the ones above it on the list. In my opinion, the support starts out strong, but then ends up too similar to the support that shares the same characters. Learning that Ferdinand's reason for going to Garreg Mach was to prove his father's corruption was an interesting side of the character I wouldn't have normally guessed. And in the Ray support, you get to see how Ferdinand is going to deal with his father's death, which is another interesting thing. And it's a really sad moment for Ferdinand, which is a good thing because Ferdinand did not get as many sad moments in Three Houses like a character like Dimitri did. Which, yes, Ferdinand is a happier character as it is, but as seen here, there's definitely a possibility for a more serious take on the character. But also in the A support, Ferdinand comes up with the education plan. Again. See, in Three Houses, in their support, Ferdinand comes up with an education plan for Edelgard's vision of the future, which was a really cool thing because it shows great character development for Ferdinand. And the same plan is shown here, even though it's an alternate universe, which makes this part of the support not as interesting the second time around. So while the unique part of the support are really good, they did reuse some stuff of Ferdinand and Edelgard's support in Three Houses, which does bring it down a little bit, at least for me. The support between Edelgard and Yuritsa is the first one in the top 10, and let me just say I'm really happy that they got a support here. In Three Houses, I was really confused on why Yuritsa and Edelgard didn't have a support since he was only playable in Crimson Flower, and he worked for Edelgard during the entire Academy phase, so to see him have a support conversation is very nice. And the storyline is actually pretty nice too, as Edelgard tries to convince Yuritsa to use a different punishment for his crimes rather than being locked in a cell forever. Which also gives more insight into why Yuritsa wants to live in a cell since he views himself as a monster, which you only really see predominantly in the support with Mercedes, and to a lesser extent Constance. And throughout the support, Edelgard seems to know Yuritsa quite well, which is another weird reason why they didn't have a support in Three Houses. But all of that aside, this is still a very amazing support and a great introduction to the top 10. Again, like many of the supports in Three Hopes, this support's major flaw is its shortened length, but I would definitely say that this support feels it way less than the other ones. The beginning of this support is largely Hubert and Edelgard talking about how they were right for going against Talus and the Agarthans, and what their plans for the future are, which was pretty cool. And then in their A support, they talk about the Ashen Demon, which is a really cool detail because Edelgard brings up how she feels a special connection to Byleth, which is a really cool callback to Three Houses because both of them share the Crest of Flames. And that part of the support is probably my favorite, because I really liked in Three Hopes when characters would talk about events that happened in Three Houses like they're theoretical. Towards the end of the support, Hubert starts talking about how he plays the role of the cold, calculating servant, which makes you wonder if Hubert's not actually like that, but he's just doing it so Edelgard can be successful, which, no, because that wouldn't make sense, but it's still cool that the support brought it up as a possibility. I think the other Edelgard and Hubert support is just a bit better because it's longer and has more character development. We also get a bit of backstory with when Edelgard was running away to the kingdom and Hubert tried to follow her, which was a cool bit of lore. This support focuses heavy on Hubert keeping secrets from and Edelgard not wanting to be left out of what was going on. And it develops Hubert in a pretty cool way because it goes from him not telling her anything to telling all of his secrets at the end. Their paired ending is really good too because that's a perfect way to do a paired ending between Hubert and Edelgard without it being too out of character for Hubert. My favorite part about Edelgard's support with Constance is the interesting plotlines it brings up. First off, it brings some interesting backstory with Constance and her crest, learning that instead of having the major crest of Macule, which is what the Empire states, she actually has the major crest of Noah. Which, yes, I know this isn't the only place you'll learn this, as you learn it in the DLC route, Cindered Shadows, but it still works here because Edelgard is the Emperor and Constance wants House Nouvelle to be restored. Which brings up the second interesting storyline. Constance wants House Nouvelle to be restored, but in the vision of the future that Edelgard believes in, the nobility would have less of a role. And both storylines of this support are written pretty well too, they're really interesting. I really like their paired ending too, because it gives a reason for House Nouvelle to exist in Edelgard's vision of the future. And there are no real negatives about the support either, I just think the 6 above it are just a bit better. I think this support is really good because it smartly writes Ferdinand being super annoying, but also a little humorous at the same time because he's desperately wanting to be as good as Edelgard or even better, but constantly failing. And it develops Ferdinand as a character really well because instead of trying to overshadow Edelgard, he's trying to help her with their plan for the future by creating a new education system. And in an interesting way, he ends up actually matching Edelgard because he comes up with something she wasn't thinking about. And the ending, in my opinion, is the perfect ending for Ferdinand and Edelgard's support. They argue and debate with each other to bring improvements to Fodlan. Just Edelgard's support is the only support of Edelgard's in Three Hopes that does not deal with the shortened length. as it has a full length since Shez is the main character. And that really gives it wonders because it has a chance to tell a full storyline without having to shorten it, or have to talk about a topic that's not really relevant to the story, or improving on the characters. I mean, with the actual support itself, I wouldn't necessarily say that explores any new aspects of Edelgard or Shez, but I think it works without it. One of my favorite moments in the support was early on when Shez and Edelgard are talking about Edelgard's plan, and Shez literally digs into a plan that she's thought out so carefully, which is very unique because there's not many other characters that really do that, outside of Ferdinand and a few others. But the bulk of the support is Shez trying to regain Edelgard's trust, because Shez is likely born a member of the Agarthans because of his shape-shifting powers, which is pretty cool because it ties into the main plot very nicely, since that is a prominent storyline in Scarlet Blaze. And overall, it's a really good support, although most of the reason it's so high compared to some of our other 3 Hope supports is because of the full length. I still think even if it was shortened, it would be pretty high, because it's really good. Throughout this video, I've been very critical on the supports that Edelgard has that only has one conversation, and this is one of them. But the reason it's so high because, it's the support between Dimitri and Edelgard. Out of all the characters, Dimitri and Edelgard probably have the most shared backstory. So to see them discuss some of that backstory, even if it was only for 4 minutes, was really cool. And even with its short length, it does a really good job of exploring how different of characters that Dimitri and Edelgard are, their connected childhood, and their thoughts on the war. And as Three Houses is my favorite game of all time, seeing Dimitri called Edelgard L at the end of the support was really cool to see. And overall, the support's very unique because instead of being 2 people on the same side saying how they're confident they're going to end the war and win, it shows 2 people on opposite side of the war sharing their viewpoints and why they're in it. Moving our way up to the podium at number 3 is Edelgard's support with Lysithea. First off, a big plus for this support is the Lysithea-Edelgard dynamic. From an early age, they were both experimented on by the Agarthans for Crest research, and they both ended up getting out of it with 2 crests and white hair, along with a shortened lifespan. But they both do different things with that lifespan. Edelgard starts a war with the Church of Seros to destroy the Crest system, and Lysithea is also ambitious, but she decides to overwork herself to remove her family from nobility. And they do really well of writing that dynamic in the support, because Edelgard is trying to get Lysithea to rest and act like her age, whereas Lysithea wants to keep working. And the race support is really cool too, as it gives a reason why Lysithea would want to be recruited by the Black Eagle Strike Force after the battle at Darajru. The reason being, obviously, that she agrees with what Edelgard wants to do. Their paired ending is one of Edelgard's best because it gives Edelgard and Lysithea the chance to vigorously defeat the Agarthans and find ways to restore their shortened lifespan. The reason Edelgard supports Hanuman as our runner-up, it is because it completely changed my opinion on Hanuman as a character. The reason I did not like Hanuman before watching this support is because I saw a lot of bad supports with him in it, for example his support Dorothea, so he wasn't that enjoyable to me. But after watching that support, my opinion on him changed. He actually has a really sad backstory that I really didn't know about before watching it. And his backstory is ramped up throughout the support because Edelgard wants to know why Hanuman is such a Crest lover but also joined her cause. The reason he's such an avid Crest scholar is because his sister died because she did not have a Crest. That bit of backstory really isn't explored anywhere else in any of his other supports, and it makes Hanuman a very interesting character from when he wasn't before. But with all that being said, this is only the runner-up on the list, because there's one that's one of the best in either Three Hopes or Three Houses. Now, a complaint I have with a lot of supports that Byleth has in Three Houses is that I can't really develop Byleth well as a character since he is essentially the player character or a self-insert, if you will. I'm not saying the Byleth supports are worse than the other ones, as there is a good few I like, including this one, which I think is one of the best supports in the entire game. It does a really good job of exploring Edelgard's backstory, as she tells us that she was, along with her siblings, trapped by the Agarthans and tortured, and she was the only one that survived. It explores why Edelgard has a connection to Byleth, which comes to an amazing head in the B support, where she reveals that she actually has the Crest of Flames, the same as Byleth, which is an amazing scene since it's very well voiced and very epic feeling. And it shows you how determined Edelgard is. And the support tells us that Edelgard really just wants to relax, even amidst all of the work she has as Emperor. The support also has one of the best character developments in the entire game, as the support is required to go down Crimson Flower, which is basically Edelgard's redemption arc. And it helps her realize that she needs to rely on her friends and Byleth if she wants to win the war. And it turns her into a less harsh leader that she becomes in a route like Azure Moon. And it all culminates in the A support when Edelgard allows Byleth to call her L, which is something only your close family and friends can call her. And to top it all off, their paired ending is probably one of the best endings for both characters. And that is the best support that Edelgard has in Fire Emblem Three Houses or Fire Emblem Three Hopes. Thanks so much for watching. This is so far the longest support conversation ranking video that I've done on the channel so far, and that's rather obvious considering the fact that I took all of her supports from both games. And I had a lot of fun making this video. If you're curious to know which character I'll be covering next, I'll be covering Zeta's supports from both games. So I hope you look forward to that. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time.